playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called persuasion.
They're the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom.
Welcome to the Stories and Wisdom podcast, where we explore the stories behind leadership and the moments that shape how people grow. Today, we are joined by Ed Essey, Senior Director of Business Value in the Microsoft Garage, where, Ed, you help drive culture transformation and early-stage innovation inside one of the world's largest companies. You spend years building frameworks for innovation and coaching entrepreneurs. And what's even more exciting, and the reason why I reached out now, was you're the author of a new book, The Inside Job. So welcome, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you, Pradeep. And good to see you again. I remember we got connected through the Garage and your great Truths and Insights project. Yeah. Inducted onto the Garage Wall of Fame, too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it started. That was exciting times. So for people who are not familiar with your work, and it is, I almost feel like you have the most fun job, if you want to call it, at Microsoft. What does Microsoft Garage really do? What does business value mean for you in a world of experimentation?
All right. So what does the Garage really do? So the Garage itself is symbolic to when Microsoft was founded by Bill Gates and Paul Allen, and they were working out of a garage in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it's a program that began a few years before I was part of it. I was at Microsoft at the time. I was interested in it, but it was from people who wanted to bring that founder's energy back to the company and to have a way that anyone, anywhere in the company can bring that founder's energy. So we became, in a way, a symbol and a movement and also a program that helps anybody anywhere in the company who has an idea that they think is brilliant find a way to bring that to life. And I'm personally fascinated with helping people like quickly and cheaply test how brilliant an idea is so that they could help make meaningful change in the world. What the Garage, in some ways, to many people, is almost synonymous with the company-wide hackathon that we put on that has hundreds of thousands of people over the years contribute to it. We've had our 12th annual one last year. And of course, we're already not only planning the 13th one, but we're planning several years out because an effort like that takes a lot of time to handle that scope. Now, what this is anyone in the company can work on whatever they want, but we also have challenges issued by executives of things that like really matter right now. And it's almost like we're creating this double-sided market between the things that really matter that the executives care about, the things that individual employees see matter in the world, and finding ways to match them up so that these best aligned ideas can be brought forth into the world. And we've been able to have an incredible success rate in moving projects forward. That said, it's not just the one hackathon. In fact, we're simultaneously running over 80 hackathons right now around the world and basically keeping this culture always going of where anyone in the company can work on things that they believe matter and make meaningful change in the world.
Absolutely. Like even the Garage, I remember walking through it and it's a maker space. Like you can do woodwork to actually you can find and solder stuff and do 3D printing. But really it was about like from idea to like, let's see it and then let's feel it. It's a privilege to actually be in a space where you can get to do that even on a weekend. I remember bringing my kids there and they felt like you could actually start doing things immediately. And it always brings a joy to me thinking about the Garage. But I think you added value to it by creating even the Garage growth framework, because the makers might not think about scale, the value, and how you take it to customers, which is a missing, almost like a blind spot for people who like to do and create, which the framework that you started building up added it. So talk to me about that and how, in a world where you're surrounded by a lot of really, really smart makers, doers who might be having a blind spot to scaling through channels and creating a business value and how you're bridging that.
So the Garage Growth Framework, which is an internal proprietary system, it came about because I kept looking at all these projects coming out of Hackathon. And I was like, how do we help more of them move forward? Because for too many places, there's this fear of innovation theater. Like, okay, what if all these people innovate? And it's sort of like you have a farm that has crops and then nobody actually goes out and harvests them. So you have tomatoes just like withering on the vine and they don't go anywhere. And I wanted to figure out, how do we help more of these projects move forward? And so began with coaching teams, talking to the teams that were moving forward, coaching others. Often I would just find somebody who had figured one thing out and somebody else who'd figured something else out, and I'd get them in a room and I would take notes. And did this for nearly 10 years before we had the first version that became the full-fledged Garage Growth Framework. And as these notes and tips were developing, we ended up coming up with a whole system that helped people move ideas even before their ideas, all the way from passion until they could have impact. And one thing we started doing, which was really fun, after we realized we were able to help a lot of projects get executive sponsorship, started exploring, well, what were the ones that got sponsorship doing differently from the beginning than the ones who didn't? And we ended up kind of reverse engineering an ideation process that actually works by looking at the ones that did go on to ship. Then we're like, okay, let's not look at how everybody's coming up with ideas. Let's look at how the ones that ended up going on to make impact in the world, how they made ideas, and explore that. And we realized some of the elements of design thinking and Agile that were right and others that were wrong and missing. And we also learned that, hey, there were some pieces from business school that got left behind by design thinking and got left behind by Agile. So we ended up combining lean startup and design thinking and Agile and business school stuff into a new way to have ideas, so that those ideas were more likely to go on and get executive support all the way through.
Yeah, it's almost a mini MBA and a mini engineering and a mini design school in what you're talking about. Like, this is 3 different parallel tracks for individuals' career growth or even education, that I almost feel like you're in the nexus of trying to eventually do something that is seeing the real world and impacting and scaling.
And it's fun because, like, I love frameworks and I love figuring out which ones fit. Kind of synthesis connections are just happen to be something that I love doing. And so I got good at that over time. But another thing is we try to figure out how to do all of that with the constraints of hacking. So this is like, how do we do it for people who do have full-time day jobs that they love and are occupying their time and have like an infinite backlog as these things do? So how can we have it so that people can go through all of those parts that matter in under a week while doing your job? So it was really like, how do we figure out the minimum effective dose from each of those disciplines and apply them all in a few hours?
Let's jump to our first segment, which is Memoir Moment. And in Memoir Moment, I want you to actually think about like it could be early career, but really, what's the origin story to actually have the most fun job in this nexus of multidisciplinary innovation space that you're currently in? I don't think it would be linear, but tell us through, like, what is that moment where you got on this path and eventually you are where you're at?
Interesting question. Like, so that moment, was it linear? No, it wasn't. Even though I've been at the same company for, it'll be 24 years in March, it still wasn't linear. And in fact, I never saw myself when I was in college going to Microsoft. I wanted to work in a startup. And I graduated at the time that the dot-com bubble burst. So I got a call the week before finals week that my job offer was rescinded. And I was already renting a place in the hills of Mountain View, like a beautiful place. There were even, when I visited it, there was like a baby deer on the property. And I was like, oh, I love this. And it was like overlooking the valley. And my job offer was rescinded right before finals week. I accepted another job offer that got rescinded, another one that got rescinded. Actually, one of them, I started on day one. I got pulled into jury duty, and that took up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I went back to the office on Friday, and the building was gone. Like, it was butcher paper up on the walls. Like, the building was there, but like the company was gone. They didn't even tell me because I was like so new. And I was thinking about going to work for Enron because that's where my girlfriend's father worked, and he was VP of engineering there. We know what happened with Enron. And then I was working at like this 5-person in a basement startup, and our big investor pitch day was September 11th. So that was like our press release day. We were talking to all these investors. So much got taken away. We ran out of funding with an idea that's actually what's happening right now, which is AI for business process management. It's like happening all over the world right now. So an idea that was kind of ahead of its time. But I ended up going to Microsoft as a startup person. And I thought the whole time I was going to leave in 2 years. In fact, there's this survey, MS poll, that was taken in every year. I would check the 0 to 2 year box for how long I thought I was going to be at the company. And I think that just ended up with me getting in roles that kept exploring the startup side of life within Microsoft, which eventually led to me wanting to empower people who think like entrepreneurs, but inside a company. And I came to realize that around that time I was having children and I was having a family. And I realized like whether or not you're a risk taker and whether or not you're entrepreneurial can be two separate things. And most entrepreneurs had to have both the entrepreneurial skills and that tolerance for risk. But there were so many people who had the same skill set, but were either chronically or acutely, like if you had young kids, not able to be tolerant of risk. So I kept thinking, how do we get that talent? How do we give those possibilities to people who want to make change in the world, who want to bring entrepreneurial things? How do we do it? And the term entrepreneur wasn't really even a mainstream term. Like, I don't even know if it is today. I added it to the word dictionary, because it kept getting the red squiggle. And I just added it to all my software dictionaries that yes, this is a word. But I became really passionate about other people's passions and how I can empower them to use the platform they had at Microsoft to make meaningful change. And that's ended up growing for me even beyond that too. I've realized that my calling, why I'm on this body, on this planet at this time, is to empower passionate people to know their worth and use their gifts to make meaningful change in themselves and the world. And so that's what I'm called to do every day. And so I love what we do at Microsoft. I get to do that with Microsoft. And it's also one of the reasons I wrote the book is so I could scale what we've learned, what I've learned from my experiences helping these people to anyone in the world who wants to learn to do it.
It's fantastic. Several points that I can go on. But given your timeline, right, you've been there probably for all three CEOs that the company has had.Maybe the really short part was probably Bill when he was leaving early on.
Yeah, he was chief software architect at that time, right? He had handed over. Ballmer was still he was reporting to him. Yeah, but he was a full-time employee still at that time.
But at that point, you've already said what you bring in, and it lines up completely with the Microsoft empowering others to do the best kind of summary, like that, embodying that, but then making it for your role, like you shall actually do that. But let's talk through this culture transformation that the company has gone through at least twice at the inflection point with the new CEOs. But at the same time, what you're doing with this focus around, let me actually bring in these entrepreneurs, give them the support that they didn't know they wanted, and then drive innovation within this company being your calling. And just holding on to this, because there is also, when you started telling your initial stories, there was an underlying grit. And also just like, this shall pass, but I'm going to keep at it that you need. Like when you see the butcher paper there and then a percent. Many people could have given up, flexed, done something else, but you're still at it, doing it, which I think is a fundamental entrepreneur thing. Like there'll be more no's. You just need a one yes to clear a stage, which is very rare for people to have because the no's kind of overwhelm most folks, and you need those individuals to go like, no, I'm looking for a yes. I haven't found it yet. What are the ways? So how is all of that for you looking back now? The different culture changes within the company, how is that engaging? And then your almost like, I feel like your summary coming into the book that you just come together.
I was just graduating college at the time that, of all that stuff, the dot-com bubble bursting, the Enron thing, 9/11. So in some ways I didn't know any different, but I also was like, look, I know I'm meant to live a life that does something interesting. We all are. So what's just the next step forward? But then you say, look at the cultural changes of Microsoft. Like when I joined Microsoft, it was like 22,000 employees. It was less than a tenth the size it is today. It still felt enormous. It was still one of like the largest companies in the world, but it felt less enormous than it was. And it was still like pretty focused in one city, except for, field and sales. So it was possible to meet and bump into just about everybody. In fact, many of Microsoft's most senior leaders today, like I either reported, I was reporting to them in some way on like a weekly basis back in those days. And what Microsoft needed to do at 22,000 people when it was like 25 years old versus what it's doing now at, I don't know the exact count, but over 10x that at 50 years old, very different things. You mentioned DOJ, like, yeah, the consent decree was happening and we were figuring out what that all meant and how do we make sure we do the right thing because we wanted to ensure that the right thing was done for the planet. We kept going through different missions statements as a company with different leadership, different sets of values. They were growing as the company was growing. I'm personally, as you pointed out, I really like the value set that exists right now to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. It's very similar to my own personal calling. And so I love that. I feel the alignment to that. But I've also felt that even with every mission that we've had before, like there was originally this idea of we wanted to put a PC on every desktop and extended way beyond that to now, now there's a supercomputer on every pocket or every wrist in certain parts of the world, but not in all parts of the world. And so how do we use that ability to get the spots to what people refer to as the global south or the more rural areas that haven't had access to technology, but seeing all the ways that technology can help with farming and so on. So it's been a phenomenal ride. And seeing hundreds of thousands of people working on this happening is just incredible.
Let's move to our next segment, Ed, which is called Decision Do-Over. So given all the work that you've done so far, is there a moment that you'd approach differently now, a choice that taught you something that you didn't expect? I'm sure there are several, like anything that you want to share and looking back now, it could be professionally or personally, that you feel like, oh, I wish that could have happened differently.
I'll share one thing that happened just to give some context. So in 2017, I just come back from parental leave. My daughter was born, my second child, and people kept commenting. They're like, he looks more tired and sick than the mother does. Like, what's going on? And I kept going to doctors to try to figure it out. And eventually found out that I had a form of cancer. And fortunately, it was a form of cancer that is very well known how to treat today. And I was able to treat it. It took 18 weeks of pretty intensive chemotherapy, but treated it and I was good. And I kept reflecting back that if I had been born in the timeline even 20 years sooner, I wouldn't have been fine. The technology and the research got to where it was difficult, but very survivable at a high percentage case. But it was like 20 years, it would have been different. So it was a reflection on mortality. And I love to say your second life begins when you realize you only live once. And I wish I would have learned that earlier because I'm fortunate that I got to learn it earlier than most people do, right? Like for many people, this is like what like a midlife crisis is. Often you're seeing the generation ahead of you getting sick and so on, and that inspires it. I got to see it earlier. I wish I would have known it even before that and realized that all of the things that I had been doing in my life that were because other people said they mattered or thought they mattered, like I wish I would have had that clarity on my calling earlier so that I could have started different things. That said, I'm also not one for regrets because everything I've done, I've learned from. And that's always been the lens I've taken on the world. But it's like, if I could have been even more beelined on what I was trying to learn and the changes I was trying to make in the world and how I was going to go about making it, say, in my 20s, I just think I could have made even more impact on more people.
Fantastic story to remind us on the focus on what you feel you would want to do to add value and then get more forward. And I almost feel like you've taken that and then embraced like, how can I scale this for others? And then being this almost like the tide to raise all ships with the captains who have like, oh, I have these things to do in the world. And I'm like, I can help you. I don't care what the idea or what the ship you're trying to do, but I believe we can help you. And I even sensed that when we were discussing with early on with even our hack work. So it's a fantastic story that I think people can take for them. They're like, here's a story with which they can also have a look of what would I not regret? What can I do something more? It's a reflection point.
Do you remember the movie Schindler's List?
Of course. Who doesn't?
Okay. So what I remember most out of maybe all movies ever is that scene at the end where Schindler, he's just saved some people. And he's like, with this ring, I could have saved more people. And he's thinking about all these things he could have done earlier if he would have known what mattered and what was capable and how he could have saved more people. And in a way, that's how I felt like, how could I scale to more people is what I'm constantly thinking all the time. How could I create the engines that allow me to scale? How can I learn the systems in the world that allow scaling and reaching more people so that I can empower more people on the planet? That, I'm thinking all the time, I was a boy when I saw Schindler's List, and I just remember that scene, and it's been such a motivating one for me.
So my Schindler's List story for you is it's this professor, I know you're from Pittsburgh, so I went to Carnegie Mellon, and there's a professor called Randy Pausch, and he had the last lecture. That's what he's currently known for. He died from pancreatic cancer. I knew him from back in school, the class that everybody wanted to get into, but you never could, because he had this multimedia class where you could go and they would give out these awards called the first penguin. So for the penguin that actually jumps straight out of winter, and then if there's red, it didn't make it. But if it's not, then the other penguins would join. So the one that took the most risk in terms of projects, they would get an award. They would not get the best project or the great stuff. But that award was celebrated significantly more than the project that did not take risks but hit all the the rubrics for the course. And there would be this long line just to see the demos of all the projects at the end of the class. And I remember going to that. And he, at his last lecture at the end, gives this comment like, well, you thought this was about a lecture, but really this is my note to my kids. And he's actually, his entire thing is around what he wanted to do and how he's done that. So for me, most of what I was doing, at least I've tried to do, would be these high risk, amplify life and fun and intersect it with learning. And can I do that kind of exploration? And I've tried to do that in a corporate environment, and I keep coming back to startups, going back to corporate, and then feeling ourselves out. So my career tends to be dots that make a picture, but definitely not a line or any geometric shape. So I think it is similar to your Schindler's List moment. For me, it was that Randy Pausch last lecture, because I actually knew him from school, but he got tremendous amount of fame from his last lecture and the book. But it is kind of a similar story. Like, it's somebody's reflecting and living having lived a no regrets life, and you're like, well, I should do that. Like, that's inspiration to set it up.
Are you familiar with AQ, the concept of AQ?
Tell me more.
Okay, so IQ, intelligence quotient, EQ, emotional quotient. AQ is agency quotient. So the degree to which you take information, gather information, use it to make decisions, how good your decisions are, whether you're picking the right actions, taking agency for yourself. So you are somebody I've always seen with like an extremely high AQ. I mean, of course you have high IQ and EQ, but also high AQ. And folks with high IQ and AQ together tend to take risks because you do the math and realize that if you're picking the right risks and taking a lot of shots on goal, they're going to pay off. So you take those risks. These are also it's also a combination of traits that scares companies in some way, because, they often want people with like an AQ of on a scale of 1 to 7, they want people more at like 3 or 4. But people who are at full on 7 tend to be riskier, and the company worries like, oh geez, are they going to, take risks at our expense? But, I love that you have that. And I also love that because you embody that like spirit in the garage we have, where we're always encouraging that these high AQ behaviors.
And I'm really happy that the company is actually embracing that, because it is rare to hire for, because even you, as you said, you were not looking to join a large company. You always had a 1 to 2 year response to a MS poll that you'd react to, but keeping them and then making sure that they are seeing their life come to bear in the context of a larger ecosystem requires a culture that allows individuals to thrive in the context of a company. Very hard to pull off for a company. So again, great job doing what you're doing in a role in a company that actually helps you do that. Let's go on to our next segment, which is Vision Venture. So this is about what you're building towards, and I, of course, I think we have to talk about the book that you came up with. I've seen how you're agile and sharing here are the different covers I'm thinking about, and then I had my perspectives on it on LinkedIn as well. But also your whiteboards about going through some of what's in the book. And it's fascinating. I learned so much from several of those talks. But how did this book come about? Where are you at? Talk us through the book called The Inside Job.
All right. So the inside job, the idea for making it an inside job was just realizing so many of the teams of people that I help, these teams of hackers, they reminded me of like the crews from heist movies where you have all of these different skill sets. You know, you could have like the mastermind and the getaway driver and the safe cracker and the demolitions person and so on. And they all come together to solve it. And it's usually a little bit more about how they work together to solve problems and less of their individual skills that are needed to pull this off. And I realized like that's what so many of the teams I'm helping are doing. So I thought, and it seems like there's always this sort of like subversiveness, like they're figuring out, you know, what are the over stories of the organization, like the things that aren't quite the rules, but people act like they're the rules. But if you subvert them and do the right things anyway, you end up making more change happen faster. And I'm like, it's just like in these movies where sometimes they take the heist crews and then the government uses them to like save the world. And it's like, oh, I love that. And where did the book come from? Like in some way, like so many people were asking me to write this book. I even had one person say like assign me homework. We were having a drink one day after work and he's like, Ed, today you need to go home. And this guy's Mike Pell. I don't know if you know him. He runs the garage in New York. He's the head of design for the garage. He's like, Ed, your homework tonight before you go to bed, you have to write the intro and the table of contents for this book and mail it to me before you go to bed. But the book actually started many years before that. Like as I was recovering from cancer, I knew there was this idea for wise technology that I wanted to put in the world, like technology that understands behavioral science and human wisdom and helps people live wiser lives, like helps augment the wisdom they have. And I've always been a fan of artificial intelligence. That was what I studied at MIT back in 97. But it was like, I thought it needed to be wiser as well. And I see so many companies use knowledge of behavioral science to get people almost like addicted to spending time on their platforms so that they can make money, but not necessarily so that the people are better. So I'm like, how would we do it? How could we design technology that benefits from and augments human wisdom? And I set out to write that book. And I wrote that book and I realized my biggest gap was I would not know how to sell wise technology inside of organizations that would be the ones who could leverage it the best. Like I could see how to sell it to entrepreneurs. I couldn't figure out how to sell it inside corporations. I was already in the garage and I'm like, okay, I need to figure out how ideas get sold inside the company. And I went to my manager and I said, hey, I want to look over every single pitch from the hackathon and I want to categorize them and understand how they're working. And I want to embed with one team for as long as possible until we can make it work. And I did that. I did this like breadth project and this depth project. And I learned so much from that became the genesis of the Garage Business Value Program and led to the Garage Growth Framework and to our coaching methods and all of that. And through that, I then wanted to figure out how do I scale the things I learned, because I started getting invited by government agencies and the military and nonprofits and customers that were big enterprise customers of Microsoft to help them. And I realized these same methods that worked inside of Microsoft worked inside of all large organizations on the planet. Then I was like, how do I get this to them? Because we're keeping the Garage Growth Framework. It's internal to Microsoft, but I wanted to find something that was beneficial everywhere. It's also a bit wonkish, right? It goes into deep details on stuff. So how can I make something that is fun and relatable? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to make it like a heist manual where at every step of the way, you're getting a tool like a blueprint or a map or a telescope that's helping you navigate this complex internal world. You start talking about social media, and like one thing I realized, like after I'd written the book, a gap I had was I didn't really know how to market on social media. So I took a course and The first 2 months at it, I was terrible. My account didn't go anywhere. I just didn't even understand how social media worked. I didn't even use it. I took an inactive account that I activated. I had 200 like friends and family on it. And first couple months, nothing. And then I figured it out. I grew to 1,000 followers. And then a month later, 10,000 followers. And 2 months later, 100,000 followers. And I just tapped on something that really mattered to people. So I learned that a lot of people don't call themselves innovators or entrepreneurs, but they do that work wherever they happen to be in the world. And they view themselves as high performers. And so once I found that identity, then I started helping them navigate through what they're dealing with. And I realized so many of them are dealing with bosses that don't understand them, or they're in situations they don't understand. Like they don't get why certain people who aren't doing as much work are moving past them on the hierarchy, or why their boss is micromanaging them. And sometimes it's just this, they have the wrong balance of IQ, EQ, AQ, and they just need to understand how the system works. And then I started helping people with that. So the book has become almost like a vector for me learning a lot more about the system and what will actually empower people.
And now I think I also understand why you had those helicopters coming in. I needed that heist backstory to understand the cover better.
Yeah.
Let's go to our next segment, Puzzle Point. Then Puzzle Point, this is about, the edge of your thinking, where you're currently working on and where you're bringing in different parts of the puzzle. So even within the context of the book, now you've written it, you've captured your work of decades and the garage and coming in, and you've, I wouldn't say cracked social media, but you definitely started flexing that muscle. That muscle is now active. How are you taking this out? What puzzles are you looking at? Are you going to go talk circuit? Are you actually going to have keynote speeches, consulting? Like, where are you thinking of like maximum impact for Ed in this context?
Yeah. I'll share first of all, like the book and a lot of the stuff I'm doing on social media, that is distinct from my role of Microsoft, but it fits the same calling I have to empower people to know their worth and use their gift to make meaningful change in the world. Now, one of the things that I see as a longer term thing for me is to create an impact investing firm. Uh, because I've seen so many incredible people, like my own partner who grew up in Ho Chi Minh City, who grew up in areas where they can absolutely make great change in the world, but they don't have the high leverage like access to venture capital that certain people in the world and certain pedigrees do have access to. So one, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for business, but most importantly, there's a strong calling to empower these people to make changes in their own communities. So that's one thing I really want to be able to do. Like, I love the work that I do at Microsoft and where it lines up, but there are other things that I want to do also. And so, yes, I'm speaking. Yes, I'm keynoting. I do, some amounts of coaching for people who are learning and growing and navigating as high performers. But a lot of this is building toward a future of where I'm creating this impact investing firm. And so much of this is like building those skills I need and the platform I need to be able to do it, but also building that initial stake of being able to raise the fund. And so I've been working with some great mentors in venture capital to understand how that works, others in impact investing. I'm talking with my own manager and HR and other leaders at Microsoft about this path and what is my leadership road through it. And so all of this is going toward this end of being able to invest in the people who are underinvested in today.
And that's fantastic that you're actually exploring it from that angle. So when you start to do this work, when would you know that you're ready and now you're setting it up? Or are you embracing what you're doing, which is like, let me start doing it, being agile, testing it, experiments? And there's usually never a right answer for both of them. You're never almost done, because that's true in almost anything else. But how are you balancing this out between like, I still need to know this before I move, or are you testing it out? Or what are your milestones look like in this?
You could probably tell by some of my answers that I'm like a begin with the end in mind kind of person, but I'm also an experiment and keep trying things and seeing what's working and double down on those things that are working. And I also hold my calling loosely, so I see how it keeps evolving as I learn more. So, I reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow. So, what I'm pursuing as a strategy right now is like, I'm still all in on Microsoft. I believe deeply that Microsoft is an amazing platform for empowering every person and organization on the planet. However, like there are some things that I want to do. So first of all, I've writing a book and all this other stuff costs a lot of money. So, like first step is, paying it off, getting to something that's sustainable. But I'm also accruing a fund. So I have a certain amount of stake that I'm building to. But as I'm building it is like I'm connecting with the people who I'll actually help. So I want to really get to know them well so that by the time I have the fund, I know who to invest in and how. And I'm working with a number of venture capitalists to understand really how to think about a hypothesis, think about how investing works. And so my first step is building up that initial stake for the fund while making all these connections and doing all this learning. So on social media, I'm continuing to grow it, but I'm not as focused on growing the numbers right now as I am focused on growing the connection and the ability to like empower the right people. And I'm working with my mentors to understand how venture capital actually works so that I'll be able to invest both inside and outside the company and growing this fund to where I'll be able to raise enough money from LPs for that first impact investing chunk.
Let's close this episode with our final segment, which is really a game break. I'll give you 2 words, and you get to choose one or the other. You don't have to elaborate, but if you want to, you absolutely can. So first one, frameworks or instinct?
Frameworks.
Executive sponsor or grassroots movement?
I got to pick one, huh? Grassroots movement.
So Sneh chooses words specifically for our audience, and she picks ones where people go like, well, really? These are... And therefore it gets to a good conversation. Speed or craft?
Speed.
Teaching or coaching?
Coaching.
Oh, build inside the system or burn it down and start afresh?
Build inside.
Big bet or portfolio of small bets?
Portfolio.
So that's the session, Ed. Thank you for your time on the Stories and Wisdom podcast. And listening to you, makes innovation feel less like a buzzword and more like a responsibility, a calling, something I think even approachable. Like most people can start to look at their interests and keep working on it, especially the stories that you started sharing. For listeners who want to follow your work, where would they find you? What should they look out for next? And what are the other things that you want to point for them?
All right. So they can find me at edessey.com, EDESSEY.com. And from there, they could get pointers to on Instagram, where I'm most prolific, followed by LinkedIn, but I also post daily on TikTok and YouTube. And also, I'd love if they pick up the book and let me know what they think. What I really did was I invested in this as a gift to the world. And so I hope it's something that does help your listeners, your audience, Pradeep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have actually listeners from, like the student level, but I'm also getting into those public sector folks where they're not used to stepping out of the boxes they're given in. But as humans, that's a very hard place to be. So there are a lot of innovators who are in a public sector world who, as you were describing, like they are innovators, but then they feel like they're getting passed over by others and that. So I think a lot of your messages, and if that's the secret sauce that you're adding in the book, would be of interest to them as well.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with the Microsoft public sector team, and they've put out a series of videos of garage-related techniques that we've shared. So that's out there as well if they like to consume it in video format. And that informed a lot of what went into the book.
Brilliant. And thank you again, Ed, for your time on the Stories and Wisdom podcast.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here.
And for all our listeners, we'll be back soon with more stories and wisdom.
playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called
They're
persuasion.
the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
Real deep pain.
That was a very different level of inequity.
What does rich mean?